So I was 6 years old when I was first trafficked into the network, and my mother or my stepfather really did not love me at all. I had a moment of grace, and in that moment I end up seeing this monster as the child that was afraid and that had become this man, and I saw all his fears. He gave up and he said, "You're so dead, nothing to be done with you. T'es tellement morte, blah, blah, blah." I was like, I feel dead, and I felt, now I'm bad, I'm dead.
As a child, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just took it. And then later on, I realized that he really had been speaking of himself.
Projection.
That he was projecting. For him, he would do anything now to make me scream. He must have ordered these bugs. They were not local, they were not native.
Not Belgian bugs.
No, they were about this big. They were dark brown, blackish, and they had pincers. And it's Nihul who led the torture, but he was also indoctrinating other
other children on how to do it.
Who had to torture me. So this is how they really take your innocence. Like, they start by raping you, but then I think as long as you're a victim in a way, you can hold on to your innocence, But then they make you do things, and then they make the children kill.
They make the children kill. And that's the function of the rabbits, to learn how to kill first. Yeah, and at the end of the book, you have had to kill. They made you kill.
And I want to describe how that training started, but the first thing that happened is after the training in the chair. And by the way, in between I was also, this is not everything that happened there. Much more happened in terms of the mind control. But after that was done, I got a break. And I got to choose a puppy. And I chose the quietest puppy from the litter. So by the time that I did kill the puppy, it was a mercy killing. And from then on, every killing was a mercy killing. And now I want to say something that I've never said before publicly. Hans Harmsen, who was in charge of this place, was the head of the Planned Parenthood of Pro Familia in Germany. I was made to train on what were basically extremely small babies that were alive.
It's good that we went to pray earlier, because this is...
Every killing was a mercy killing. I had to do it. If I don't do it, it'll be worse for the victim.
I think you did the right thing. As strange as that may seem.
No choice.
The best choice given the circumstances.
And then I was told that I was really good at it. And praised for being a good killer.
very important what you are doing right now.
Healing is spiritual because when you integrate, there's magic to it. You know, like I do the work and then there's a spiritual component to it that is the magical, that I don't know when I'm going to transform, but suddenly I have this inner message that I'm good now, that this is over, that I'm there. So once you have this integration though, this neural integration, you know that you are innocent. You know that it wasn't your fault. That I speak a lot about the power paradigm, and I realized that I was giving it too much power because I had this vision that it's actually already a ruin.
Oh yes, it's coming down.
We have been dissolving it with the love, with the heart.
We are. That's what we're doing.
Yes.
That's great. Yeah, that's true.
A man who rapes a child, it might be hard to believe that that man is actually looking for love. But as the child who was raped by these men, I know that they were. Because I know that they brought this most vulnerable part in themselves to me, which was safe to them. That's to say, the part that was not loved.
That's the most vulnerable part.
Yeah. When you're looking at the evil that people do, they are all looking for the substitute of that. They're looking for the substitute of the true love, which is God.
Dear viewers and listeners, welcome to the third episode of Epoché, a podcast in which I analyze the belief systems of people without passing judgment. That is the real significance of Epoché in Greek, and today I have invited Anneke Lucas, author and survivor of extreme abuse, and advocate for people in the same situation. Anneke, welcome to my show.
Hi, Brecht. Very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me. It's very significant to be back in Belgium.
I can imagine. I read your book, and I knew something about these things, but I could not have imagined that it was so dark. And I want to say to the listeners and the viewers that we have been to the chapel first to pray, to be able to handle all the darkness. And I know that for a lot of people this will seem like totally, absurd, and maybe they won't believe what you say, but I can say now that I believe you.
I see. Okay. Yes. So I would say meditate. I meditate. I pray too, but I'm mostly focused on meditation, I guess, coming from the Eastern traditions. Mm-hmm. But yes, to be in that stillness, I don't think without spirituality, it would be possible to get the understanding that I feel that I have been able to gain over the years, because these events are from my childhood, and I'm almost 60, so I have more than 30 years of healing, and my whole life has been dedicated to this. So if you say people might not believe me, nah, not too many actually. I do get attacked, obviously, but yeah. I'm not really worried about not being believed.
That's one of the things I find particularly inspiring in your story, that it is just not just the sensationalism of the abuse you have suffered, but that you have also overcome all these shocks and the things you've been through. And you're even now a yoga teacher and inspiring other people. And, you know, if anybody would be in deep trouble, you can serve as an inspiration. And that is why I have invited you, basically.
Oh, thank you. I'm not a yoga teacher anymore, but I did, I practiced yoga, and it was a very important part of my healing. Yoga, and then separately meditation. And then I created an organization to bring yoga into the prisons in New York. So I did that for 10 years as well. Okay.
And so in those prisons, I guess you find a lot of people with trauma just as you had. Mm-hmm. And that would be the parable of the wounded healer, I think. If you cannot heal another person if you haven't lived through the same thing.
Right. A lot of trauma, obviously, a lot of people who are there essentially because of trauma or or poverty, unfortunately also, because I was also in the jails in New York City, but where basically people are put because they don't have money to pay bail for, you know, whatever, a misdemeanor. But I was really there because prison is itself a very traumatizing place, and people are treated in prisons as the lowest of the low and as completely worthless as human beings. And this is very much how I was treated as a child. And it was very significant to go and to bring hope, to, under the pretext of bringing yoga, to bring hope and connection from the heart with people that are being treated that way all day long, just as I had. And I never had anybody coming to give me hope.
Yeah, that's also something I really... We'll get into some details that always spoke to me when reading your book. That is how much love you felt for your perpetrators, in the sense that they abused you horribly, and you always tried to see the person doing the abuse.
Well, I think that my answer, if I may speak on that, it's going to be a little extended, because
Take your time.
That love for the perpetrator. So I was 6 years old when I was first trafficked into the network, and my mother or my stepfather really did not love me at all. So I didn't get love. I had been loved by a caretaker in the first 3 years of my life, and I knew what love was. Or that's to say, I had been seen as a human being, as a baby, and then I think that allowed me to develop emotionally.
3 months?
No, 3 years.
3 years, okay, that's important. Yes.
3 years of consistent, not every day, but 5 days a week, of caretaking and sweetness and real nurturing.
So you had a reference?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's
so
important.
I had a reference of being seen as being innocent and cute, and she healed me. She actually wrapped me on her body with sheets so that she could carry me always, because she must have known that my mother was abusing me.
At 3 years old already? Oh.
In infancy, my mother was abusing me.
That's not in the book?
No.
Okay, interesting. Please continue.
Yes. So I was on her body, and I have had memories of her sweetness, of her being viewed and feeling warm and feeling, this warm love. And I think it gave me a sense of self. And my mother didn't have that, my stepfather really either. So it was cold, there was nothing at home. So my perpetrators gave me certain things that I needed for my personal development. I would not have figured that out as a child, obviously, I didn't know. But I was seen in certain ways by some of the perpetrators. So I attached emotionally to my perpetrators. So that love that I felt was attachment, which all children will do that. And we attach to whomever is there, whatever adult is there. And I was, for example, intelligence. My mother never reflected that back to me, but a perpetrator did. Or other qualities that I had were very much reflected back by perpetrators, but never at home. So I automatically, felt more connection to the abusers.
Interesting.
Because they were actually giving me things that I needed. So there's the attachment, which has to do with development, child development. And then there's another thing that happened when I was 9 years old, that I had an experience. It was a very dark moment. I don't describe it in the book either, but I had an experience where a perpetrator who was absolutely a monster and had shown me that he was absolutely a monster, I had a moment of grace. And in that moment, I end up seeing this monster as the child that was afraid and that had become this man. And I saw all his fears and all his own hang-ups. And I saw very great detail of, him feeling like he was slow and he couldn't follow, and feeling ugly and feeling worthless. I saw all of it in this moment, and I realized that it was a moment where there was an influx of grace, where I could see this man through Christ's eyes.
Yeah.
It was the Christ consciousness that sort of came through me. It didn't feel like me at all.
You saw him with the eyes of God, like a patient.
Yes, and it was the moment of passing, by the way, of a little boy in the network. No.
Another one.
Yes, Wouter.
Yes.
Wouter. So Wouter was my little friend. He was only 7. And it was the moment of his passing that I felt like this light spirit that Wouter was. And then I felt this Christ energy moving through me. And right in that moment when I would have hated this man the most, I actually saw his own child, and I saw that the reflection that he was the little boy who felt slow, which is what Wouter was technically. He was slow. And so that he had to kill that boy.
For what purpose? Because what I would like to understand is their psyche. I understand a bit through your book, but please elaborate as much as you can, because I really want to understand.
Yes. So I was in the network for 6 years, and so this is the Belgian network. I am Flemish, as we know, and I speak Flemish, but obviously English. I'm much more comfortable with English in this speaking about these subjects, since I've been gone for more than 40 years in Belgium. So
now you live in the States.
And I live in the States.
For the audience,
yeah.
Was that a conscious flight away from what happened here? I guess so.
Yes, it was actually following the instructions of being rescued from the network, and with instructions that included going to New York.
And that was the man you fell in love with, we can say, which was a crook, a criminal.
Yeah.
And we know him. He's famous in Belgium. His name is Patrick Hamers.
Yeah.
So when I think the first time I talked to you on the phone and you mentioned his name, I was like, what? Is that connected? Because he was like the gang leader of the Bende van Nevel. I don't know how to translate that, but it was a famous gang in the 80s that killed 29 people in a mall. So I was 5 years old or something like that, and it was the talk of the town for decades.
And he was the gang leader of that, the Bende van Nevel?
That's what. There were more, but this story has never been cleared up. And in my investigations, I have found that the Bende van Nevel, so the gang of Nevel, let's say, was like a Gladio operation, so a stay-behind network against communism to arouse, how to say that, to destabilize the public opinion with shocks, so that politics would get more power. Gladio, if people look it up, they'll find it. It's officially denied, of course, like MK Ultra is officially denied and all those things.
Well, I think David van der Steen, the victim who was 9 years old when his family was shot and killed in that in one of those events in the Deleuze,
yes.
I think he saw his face. He saw the face of Patrick Hamers when his mask fell.
Aha. You told me, and he went to the police, and they did not
believe him,
and yeah.
And it's always been downplayed in the media, but I fully believe there's actually Patrick Hamers also told me something when he rescued me, that he wanted me to leave this country, and he said you don't want to be here in the 80s.
Uh-huh.
So I think that's quite significant, that he knew something was going to happen, and he was part of this. And of course, Paul van den Boeynants was the boss of the network, and he was also involved with these things.
Yeah, because it's an important principle for people who are starting their investigations into the occult, is that terror has always been used as a means to enhance the power of the elites. Like, I recently discovered that the word mafia should be written with one F, because it's an abbreviation of Mazzini Autorizza Furti Incendi e Avvelamenti. And that means as much as Mazzini, Giuseppe Mazzini, which was the unifier of Italy, he was a Mason, 33rd degree. He authorized poisonings, arson, all kinds of terror, so that the local communities in Italy would feel that there's need for a bigger power. And so the unification of Italy has been done through terror. And so when I look at the 80s in Belgium, we had large discussions about the communities, Flemish and Walloon community. We had like 8 governments in 2 years with Martens and all those guys. And so I think that was also a method to divert attention.
Well, I certainly wouldn't exclude that. And just the fact that Patrick Hamers said you don't want to be here in the 80s, and that he was recognized by a victim, I think that should be enough as far as, confirming that he was part of this. And, Van den Boeynants was involved in several clubs, Club of Rome, for example, and he was also involved in CEPIC later on, which was an extreme right-wing organization. And through some of these organizations, he was also involved with, when we talk about the network, that's to say what I call the network, which is actually a global network of Satanists, often 33rd degree Masons, that are all about controlling the world and controlling the populations, and do their work behind the scenes. Van den Boeynants wanted very much to be a part of that, and it is also deeply connected to the Nazi ideology, and it's also literally connected. And certainly I can speak more about that later in terms of what happened to me.
Because yes, you speak about your training as a sex slave, or a mind slave, sorry, in Germany.
Yeah.
But you don't elaborate on that in your book.
Well, I go back to that period a little bit. So the book really is the last year that I was in the network in Belgium, from 10 to 11 years old, which was 1973 to 1974.
But you were for 6 years, so you came into the network at 6?
Age 6, yes.
And at age 6, men had sex with you?
Yes.
That's just, I, as a grown man with a healthy sexual appetite, I could not even imagine being aroused by a child.
For sure not, no.
I cannot see, that's why I would like to understand.
Yeah.
My impression is that it is not even about sex.
Well, you were just mentioning that earlier. Yeah. Where does that come from? Why do they do that, right? Because we're talking about this monster man that I mentioned earlier, who was an international networker, very powerful in the world, a household name kind of thing, who he had not murdered this child with his own hands, but that child was murdered in a ritual.
In a ritual?
Yes. And that
here in Belgium or where?
That ritual was held in his honor, and it was surrounding the Bilderberg meeting of 1972.
Okay.
And he was one of the people who was present at that Bilderberg meeting. And a lot of those members, Bilderberg, are people that I've recognized.
That you had personal dealings with? Or,
yeah, that I saw over the years, or that I was raped by over the years. And so that network, the Belgians, Van den Boeynans, as the boss, wanted very much to do business with these people because they were extremely powerful, but did not want to necessarily, of their own, become Satanists. Mm-hmm. I believe that Van den Boeynans was also a Freemason, a 33rd degree Freemason, and that a lot of his connections came through that. And of course, the Masons themselves are a group that sorts through its members to find the ones that are going to get to the 33rd degree.
I think that is the function of the degrees, to see who is perverted enough to go up.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And ambitious and perverted, yeah. Mm-hmm. Who gets it in that sense, you know, like you get it, and the sincere ones will get stuck on this 32nd degree. Mm. So,
are you saying that until the 32nd degree, they're all naive but uninformed, and that the evil starts at the 33rd degree?
Well, the real evil, it's satanic at the 33rd degree, yeah.
Okay, and
so that is like do as thou wilt, and then what they want to do as thou wilt is, again, basically the subject of what is their motivation, yes? So we're talking about the ritual in which my little friend was killed. The monster man, who was the international networker, that ritual was set up in his honor. Mm-hmm. And so Van den Boeynans was there. I don't remember the location, but it was beneath a cathedral or something. It was in a place with vaults. It was an ancient vaulted place. I don't remember if it was in Belgium, but there were definitely a lot of Belgians there, regulars of the network. But it was done in honor of this international guest. I and this little boy had been given to this international guest, one to be sacrificed, one to be raped during the sacrifice.
Yes, and this little boy, which is Wouter or another
Wouter.
One? Wouter was killed. I believe you wrote torture to death, and you were not. At that
I was
occasion.
raped.
Yes, you were raped. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. By this hotshot, or by more guys, or you were exclusive to him, I have the impression.
Just for that ritual that the Belgians put on, because they were not real Satanists, but they did it for him. Mm. But they would do those things anyway, but maybe without the capes and without the symbols.
So you saw that the capes, the symbols, the ritual aspect of that. Because now you have series on Netflix where they wear capes, like, I don't know what the name is again, but it's about secret societies. And that is always so funny to me. In Hollywood, they present reality as if it were fiction. Right. And in our press, they represent fiction as if it were reality.
Yeah.
So this is another mindfuck. Sorry, my French. Another twist of the mind, and I the more I become awake, the more I see it, that they try to confuse us, confuse and conquer, and so
all to make sure that we don't find out this secret, that those very visible people at the top and some not so visible that are sort of behind the scenes are not only satanic, but what that means, I think, the Satanism and the belief in Satanism is a justification, a very complex justification to dump unresolved issues, trauma, pain onto a victim. And the cycle, so when a man kills a child, or when a man has a child killed, wants that to happen, is raping another child while another child is being butchered to death, that is how high he gets from that. That is because when children are abused, and this is a culture of abuse, by the way, it's a culture of trauma and a culture of abuse, of child abuse, of child sexual abuse, by the way, the elite, that when a child is abused again and again in his own family, that there's little parts, that give up hope. Fragments. I call it parts, but every time there's a child inside that gives up hope, a child that gives up hope, that someone will ever see them as they are, understand their pain. When a person gives up hope, there's a little death that occurs inside. And in my experience, the people that I was dealing with, they were as if walking dead. They were full of little dead parts. And they came to life through putting that death on someone else. Because in that moment, they feel, it is sort of the reverse of life.
Yeah.
That they steal the life from those children that are that have their life energy, stealing that life energy through the abuse or through the murder, in order to, for this moment, get high. And because all of them, I'm 100% sure, were as children sexually abused, they would end up with child sex slaves like myself. And then in that situation, with a child who, like them in that moment, was completely powerless, and they also could dispose of me if they needed, so that there would be never a witness to their so-called weakness, they can keep the control and or let's say the idea of power, the idea of control on the outside with their lies, while going to the other side of their own helplessness, humiliation, and powerlessness from the moment that they were abused and then the moment they gave up. So they have to get their life energy through false means. And I believe that the sexual abuse is the most raw way in which these people get to feel the power that they didn't feel in the moment that they were abused.
But there is more rawness than sexual abuse in your book, like the torture scene that you describe. I think that might be the most raw.
Well, that was the most raw for me.
And
that was the for me personally, that was. Of
course, yes. I really had my. But there's something that's there was something that struck me in your book was, at a certain given moment you had given up so completely. You never gave up fully.
No.
But you came close to giving up. That one of the perpetrators, I don't know in which chapter, actually threw you away through the room, and he said, "You're dead already." And so they are not interested in somebody who's dead already, because they cannot suck any prana or chi or how you want to call it out of you.
That was Van den Boeynants.
That was him. Okay.
But then later I realized, because I was affected by that, I felt actually
insulted, like I'm still alive, you know?
No. I didn't feel that. I felt guilty.
Guilty?
I felt that he was right, and then I felt guilty that I'm dead.
Whoa, not too fast. You felt guilty that you're dead. I don't understand.
Because that's what he said. Well, to let you know more precisely what happened is, when he started to beat me up, this is Paul van den Boeynants, and I was, I don't know, 8, 9 years old.
He beat you up to check if you would respond, if you would...
He wanted me to scream.
Yeah, he didn't. Yeah.
And I didn't. But he also looked at me as if we were going to play a game. So I thought he wanted me to hold out.
Okay.
So I thought he wanted me to not do what he wanted, if that makes sense.
Well, yes, I follow. And then he gave up on you, and you felt guilty for not playing the game right.
Well, he gave up, and he said, "You're so dead. nothing to be done with you. T'es tellement morte. Blah, blah, blah. I was like, I feel dead. And I felt, now I'm bad, I'm dead.
As a child, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just took it. And then later on, I realized that he really had been speaking of himself.
Projection.
That he was projecting, and that what I got this insight into him for a moment, in this very dramatic moment. I got this, it's like his soul flew out of his eyes, and I got all this information that he was like this cardboard figure, that he just needed to be on top all the time, and that all of it was that he was so afraid that underneath that he felt like smaller than everybody else. He was always so superior, and he was very dramatic.
Mm-hmm. Talking about his dramatic qualities, for international audience that might see this video, he was the prime minister twice of Belgium. So we're not talking about some low-rank politician. And I do remember when I was a child, he had been abducted by the Bende van Nevel, by the gang of Nevel. And then he had...
By the Bende van Hamers.
The gang of Hamers, yes. Yeah. That's pretty much the same. So they knew each other, so that was a play. And I always had the intuition, even as a child, watching the television, he had this press conference where he was interviewed by, 100 journalists.
Hundreds of journalists, yeah. And it was the most widely attended press conference in the history of Belgium.
Yeah. And all the flashes came of the not telephones, no, but the cameras.
Yeah.
And he wore glasses.
Yeah.
Because he said it was pure acting, and I felt it was acting.
He said what he was doing to children. He said he had been chained to a wall in a dark basement.
Yeah, so that's a projection again. And that his eyes hurt from the flashes because he had been blindfolded for months.
Yeah, because he had been in the dark.
Yeah, and yeah. I just felt here in my stomach.
You realized that he was lying.
Yes, but I could not pinpoint it. And then I'm, as you know, a monetary economist. I started investigating the monetary system. And then I thought, it's obvious that when you print money, that you create inflation. How come that nobody can see it? And then I started to investigate the occult side and the history of money printing. And then you come to ritual child abuse going back to Canaan.
Wow.
And that's how I came to this
subject.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so slowly but surely, I also saw, like in Belgian politics, I think Belgium is one of the most satanic countries in the world. I feel very dark energy when I come here. I don't live here anymore. I cannot live here anymore. I might come back, live here anymore. Your feeling has changed, you told me, about Belgium. But in the 80s, it was really a dark place.
Well, in the 80s, it was a dark place, and even in the 90s. And I haven't lived here since 1981. Mm-hmm. So a few things about that.
I was born in that year.
Okay, so that's when I left. So a few things about that is that I didn't know the name of Patrick Hamers. So Patrick Hamers was Patrick to me, but I also had really blocked him out completely. And when he came back, I actually had images, and I had the description, and I had information. And at one point, I spoke with Regina Louf.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
So that was in maybe 99 or 2000. I was introduced to her, Douglas de Koning,
yes.
The journalist. I had been speaking to them.
Can you explain one moment? Douglas de Koning is the journalist who wrote a book about
the Dutroux case.
The Dutroux case, in which 30 tests.
And that's so. Later, he wrote another book about 30 witnesses that were about to testify about basically about the existence of the network, the VIP network in Belgium, who then ended up dead.
They shot themselves through the back of their head with a rifle and stuff like that. Things that are impossible. Yeah. So
Douglas de Koning wrote an extremely detailed book about the Dutroux case. So the Dutroux case was in '96. One pimp of the network got caught, who immediately said that he had friends in high places who would protect him. And then the next 8 years, survivors came forward, and Regina Louf was the one who had the most detailed recollections. Unsolved child murder cases were opened based on her testimony, and her testimony ended up being cut off from the case, as well as all the other survivors' testimonies. And by the time the case went to trial 8 years later, it was just Marc Dutroux, his wife, Michel Martin, and then Le Lièvre, I believe, who were like basically nobodies, and then Michel Nihoul, who was involved but who got off, and who was also active, beginning to be active in 1973 when I was there.
Yeah, we'll talk about that guy later, because I really, this is to me the biggest monster. You might have seen others, but it's incredible. And the life he had afterwards was actually a life of a celebrity. But let's talk about that later. I first wanted to go to... No, I feel you haven't finished what you wanted to say.
Well, we had started to talk about...
Dutroux and the BIS case. That is to repeat what you have said. So you had the Dutroux case. Dutroux said, I'm not alone. I'm basically the court's provider.
Yeah.
And then they siphoned that off to file BIS, file B, let's say.
Right.
And then they focused exclusively on Marc Dutroux, a lowlife.
Right. And we wanted to give context because of Patrick Hamers. And Patrick Hamers and Paul van den Boeinans. So, as you know, I was rescued from the book. I didn't know the name of Patrick Hamers. But I described him to Regina Louf in a phone conversation that we had. She actually doesn't remember it. Because she said a lot of survivors came to her around that time, and I was introduced to her by Douglas de Koning, and then briefly, and then we spoke on the phone once. And in that conversation, I described Patrick Hamers to her, and she said, oh, sounds like Patrick Hamers. Then I looked him up and realized that was him. But I didn't know anything.
Really?
Because I wasn't living here. And it's not like I was following the news here.
Well,
so I didn't know of him.
Are you talking about the 80s and the 90s where you had
80s
left?
And the 90s, I wasn't here.
Okay, I understand, yes.
So I had no idea. And but Patrick Hamers rescued me, and in exchange for, because this was considered his great weakness, that he wanted to rescue me, in exchange for that, he went to work for Van den Boeinans. That means that 15 years later, Van den Boeinans, who was the boss of the network, and Patrick Hamers owed him one. First, Van den Boeinans was caught for tax fraud, 130-something counts of tax fraud, was sentenced to a suspended prison sentence of 3 years for his services to the country, was suspended, and a large fine. He went in appeal, and his name was in disrepute. For his pension, though, for his retirement, he actually had wanted to become mayor of Brussels. Now, he couldn't run. And I happened to have read this online in an outtake of a book by Wilfried Martens, his biography, his autobiography, where Wilfried Martens describes the scene that Van den Boeinans came to him because he wanted to run as mayor of Brussels. He couldn't. Wilfried Martens said, there's no way you can't run, because his name was in disrepute. He was completely distraught. That's the scene I read described. Then Van den Boeinans is kidnapped a while later. A month later, he comes back, and he has the most widely attended press conference of the whole country with his glasses and his...
I remember.
Qui m'a enlevé? Huh? Remember that? Yeah. Remember that dramatic?
Yeah.
It was so dramatic, they made a song from these lines, Qui m'a enlevé, which was very funny, because, of course, we know now who kidnapped him.
Yeah, Patrick.
No, he himself.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But they blamed it on Patrick Hamers.
But then, obviously, they went through the motions.
Yeah.
But the cops who describe finding Patrick Hamers, they describe going through hoops and as if all these doors opened magically in order for them to even find Patrick Hamers also. And then once he was caught, that's it, then they drop you.
Yeah, he died in a prison cell from hanging from a radiator.
From a 4-inch tall radiator.
4-inch tall radiator, he hung himself.
He was 6 feet tall.
It's just, it reminds me of Epstein.
Yeah.
He who hung himself in a cell with nothing to hang.
Right.
So...
The radiator and the doorknob is classic mafia style, though, killings. So the signature of the mafia. But, yes.
The doorknob. Ah, man, it's just, if you start talking to people about that, they look at you as if you're crazy. And we are actually, it's the obverse. We are crazy to believe what comes on television. That is, to me, real craziness. And since I've stopped watching television, I have regained my senses.
So to speak about the country and the vibration in the country, and in general, I guess, the change in the world. You see, I started trying to speak about this. So I survived in 1974. And I followed these instructions that Patrick Hamers gave me. He was very controlling, so they are extremely detailed. And I lived by them.
Okay. What were those instructions?
Never become a prostitute. Never do anything. Never sleep with anybody to get anything from them. Never do it. Never become a drug addict. Never buy drugs. You can take drugs if they're given to you, but never do anything to get them. You have to marry.
Okay.
Oh, no, he said, leave the country. You don't want to be here in the 80s. You should go to London, Paris, New York. You should go to New York. And you should marry not someone who's older and made his own fortune, but you should marry someone your age from a wealthy family, preferably a family of New York bankers.
Okay.
You should never speak about anything. You should forget everything. Me, every name that you've ever heard. You should forget it. Never speak to anybody. Never do it.
So you're not following his advice right now?
No. Not anymore. I don't need it anymore.
Well, that's an issue. Because before doing these interviews, I have very good collaborators. One of my collaborators actually called me and he said, are you sure you want to go through with this? Because it's so dark and, things might happen to you, Brecht. And I said, well, what might happen to Anneke?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for thinking of that.
Yeah. Yeah. But are you never afraid that coming out, even with names, they have deceased all of them, but even that, are you not afraid that they might kill you?
I'm not afraid. And if I am killed for this, then that's fine. Because I'm not going to not speak anymore.
Thank you. That's why I wanted you here.
But I'm not afraid, and I don't feel it's going to go that way. I don't want to be overly confident.
I don't feel that either. I have no fear.
But I have spoken to a lawyer in Belgium to weigh my options. And I have protected myself in the measure that I could protect myself. I have been attacked, harassed, threatened in the last years. And it seems that the more my story takes, the more happens. In 2016, a black and white video of mine went viral. And
yes, I have seen that.
Very strange things happened. In 2020, I was approached by a lawyer to think about suing the estate of the monster I described earlier, the international networker. And as we were preparing to do that, and as the lawyers of that family were approached, a lot happened then.
Like what? What happened?
Well, I was infiltrated by several people that I realized later were spies for them.
Spooks.
I was threatened in no uncertain terms.
How? Be specific.
So the people who infiltrated, one acted as a survivor. And she was actually on a group that I have, a chat group for survivors of satanic ritual abuse and mind control. So I created that group. It's a very active group. And this person had already been on that group for several years. So this is online, so we don't know people's faces, right? We don't know who they are. It's clear that she went through this. But it was interesting that the vibration that she brought was different. She had an interesting sense of humor, but clearly no healing. And she also kept saying that she always remembered everything, which is almost impossible.
You dissociate.
You have to dissociate much more than that. So it's sort of like their line. If you don't remember it, you're lying. You know, false memory.
If you don't remember it, you're lying.
The false memory syndrome that is sort of created by, you know, those, or that has been supported and pushed into the world and funded by, as one of the many resources and messages that go out into the world to make sure that we never realize what is really happening.
Wait, not too fast. The false memory, what is that? They tell you that something else happened?
False memory syndrome was a big deal. In the early 90s, I believe, there was what was called in the US, I believe, a satanic panic, they called it. So there were stories of satanic ritual abuse surfacing, but it was extremely sensationalized. And we don't know what was true and what was not true. And based on that, something emerged out of that was called the false memory syndrome.
Okay.
And one psychologist, she's not a clinical psychologist, but she's a research psychologist, wrote a book called False Memory Syndrome. So she did a few tests, and so certain so a small control group of 25 people were told by older siblings that when they were 8 years old, they had been lost in a mall and they had been all upset and everything, and then they had been found by a nice old man or something like that. And they created this memory.
Like Inception, like the movie Inception. I don't know if you have seen it.
I don't watch that many movies.
Okay.
So they all believed it. And so she created false memory and then used that for the rest of her career against survivors who had memories of trauma. So there are people that were getting credits for their doctorate that worked on this study that are embarrassed now because it was not meant to, it was, for her, in her case, meant to discredit survivors, and she did really well. And so we don't know if this psychologist was a Satanist herself, but certainly she has been financially benefiting from this false memory syndrome. She might be a true believer, but certainly they can platform someone and then just help them along, because that became a national bestseller somehow. And it's ridiculous, actually. When you look closely at it, it's ridiculous. And then the false memory movement was created by the parents, the mother particularly, of a woman who is a scholar, who is also a survivor, and who confronted her parents about the sexual abuse about her father. So in response, those parents created the false memory movement.
You know, one of the biggest tricks of the devil, I think, is to make us believe that he doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really a struggle with yourself. What do I believe? And what is too sensational for me? And you talk about the sensationalism that they use. That's a technique. Well, it is sensational in and of itself, but the way they broadcast it, to extremes.
It's like the most extreme, the greatest extremes of darkness, really.
Yeah, you have like script writers in the CIA when there's a coup, and they prepare the press for an intervention against Gaddafi or Saddam or Assad. Then you get all kinds of reports of torture of prisoners. And over the years, I have seen something coming back always in those stories, and that they were anally raped with a brush you use to clean the toilet. And I saw that same story in 3 occasions coming back. I was like, or there is like this international agreement to rape prisoners with, or this is just a script. And the more you learn about the occult, the more you see that they use sensationalism. For instance, a woman died of COVID, and they had to kill her dog as well because the dog also had COVID. So it's just adding this little extra so that people feel sorry for the dog and really go into the emotion. It's childish, really, but the masses, in a certain sense, are childish. They're not always grown up.
I wouldn't be so down on the masses. So it goes back to a little bit with, the atmosphere in Belgium. So when I arrived here yesterday morning, I have to say, when I used to come back here, I used to be met, and I think especially with the Dutroux case, what happened then, because the Dutroux case, in my experience, as far as I know, this was the only case where the international newspapers were talking about the elite pedophile network of Belgium. I read it in the New York Times. That's how I found out about it. It was all over. And it was all over Europe, for sure. It was huge.
It was.
All over Europe. And it was accepted in the beginning. Remember, I don't know, you were too young, the White Marches?
No, of course. 96 was that. I was 15 years old.
And that was because the sincere judge, Arnaert, had been fired for technicality for eating a plate of spaghetti at a fundraiser for the victims. He had been fired for that. And then, of course, he was replaced. Regina Louf's investigators were replaced to make sure that the sincere people would not get their way, because he had promised, Arnaert, the first judge who got fired, had promised the public to get to the bottom of this.
Shouldn't do that.
Well, it was inevitable, I believe.
Yes.
But somehow Belgium was the only country that I know where this whole thing came out, and it was all over, and it was in the mainstream media. And then it was suppressed again. And I think it must have done something to the Belgian people, because 300,000 people walked in the streets to defend the innocence of the dead children. The case, wearing white for the children. And after 8 years, no one made a peep about it anymore. And only Marc Dutroux, and of course the 3 other defendants. Nothing about the larger network, no other names, just like with Epstein and Maxwell. Nobody else got named, nothing else came of it. But except in Belgium, it was all over. It was already all out. And then it had to go back down. And my feeling, I may be wrong, but I would come back to Belgium and I would feel this oppression. And yes. I would feel this extreme depression in people and the sort of grumpiness, and
I feel it.
Like a dark, heavy blanket. But yesterday I came back and it feels very different. First of all, I'm sitting here talking to you. That, to me, is a miracle. That alone means that not only is the world changing, but Belgium is also changing. This is possible. I'm
skeptic.
I come from not being able to go anywhere with my truth. No one wanted to know it. I couldn't find a therapist for 10 years. This is to speak about these things privately. And obviously, I'm not crazy. So if I'm speaking about these things and a therapist says, I don't believe you, which did happen one time, that's them.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have philosophized quite a lot on the definition of crazy. And mostly it's just a quantitative issue, isn't it? If you have a minority opinion, you have something in politics which is called the Overton window, and that is the window of acceptable opinion. And if your opinion is outside that,
Oh, I see.
the only thing they can do is either ignore you or ridiculize you or, medicalize you, like you have some condition. It's like you would be at the beach and a pink dragon would come out of the water. That's the equivalent to them.
Right.
And that is changing. That is changing. And I think the internet has a lot to do with that. Like this podcast culture, that's something of the last 5 years. I think they are losing control over the narrative. That I do see.
And that narrative, all the world's resources that end up in their hands are used to protect the lie.
And it costs more.
And the
more.
lie is that what they do behind closed doors and is exactly about what I survived. That's the lie.
Yeah. Let's talk about that a bit. Because